Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. Lindsay Wilson was a kind-hearted and empathetic person who wanted to love and be loved. Her primary mistake was failing to recognize her partner's true nature in time. As time passed, she struggled to escape from their codependent relationship. Lindsay's story began when she discovered she was pregnant at 17. Raised in a loving family, she wasn't emotionally unprepared, but her boyfriend's abandonment scared her. Lindsay was aware that motherhood would bring physical and financial challenges. She was relieved to meet Mitchell, who seemed like a gentleman, attentive and caring, and didn't shy away from her despite her pregnancy. However, his true nature would eventually be exposed, leading to devastating consequences. Mitchell fell in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, raising her child as his own. He worked hard to provide for her, even taking extra hours to ensure she wanted for nothing. However, their 5-week-old relationship shocked their parents, who felt they were rushing into marriage. Despite their doubts, they got married in August 1995, surrounded by Lindsay's family and only a few of Mitchell's relatives. Lindsay's family noticed that Mitchell was overly sweet and polite, but they kept their misgivings to themselves. The newlyweds had a dispute on their wedding night, which left a bad impression on Lindsay's relatives. Mitchell's behavior became increasingly controlling and violent. Lindsay sought psychological support and reported the abuse, but her husband would answer the door and phone calls, preventing her from contacting her social worker. The social worker, concerned for Lindsay's safety, reported her missing in February 1999. The police visited the address but were unable to speak with Lindsay, and Mitchell claimed she had left him for another man. The search for Lindsay began, and her relatives reported that they last saw her on December 11th, appearing happy and healthy. Her mother had tried to reach her on December 24th, but was told by Mitchell that she had left with friends, accused of infidelity. Detectives were puzzled by the fact that no one had expressed concern about Lindsay's well-being for 2 months. It was clear that Mitchell had isolated her from the outside world, including her close relatives. Although they had previously struggled to communicate with her, it was possible for Lindsay to go unnoticed for a while. However, this didn't mean her family wasn't worried. The news of her disappearance was alarming to everyone. They all described Lindsay as a modest person who didn't drink, and Mitchell had restricted her contact with friends and acquaintances. There were many inconsistencies in Mitchell's story, which contradicted his character profile and raised the investigators' suspicions. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. The situation merited a thorough investigation, so the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances, trying to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where they lived. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted by the time Lindsay's disappearance was reported. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person, on December 15th at the local post office, sending several letters and postcards. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea together, and during their brief conversation, Lindsay slipped a note into her sister's hand, asking her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and forgot about it in the whirlwind of days. Regrettably, she couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again for several months. Investigators tried to hold on to any information they could, suspecting that she was no longer alive due to her prolonged absence. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence, but the more they learned about their life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. They had married shortly after their wedding and moved away from their parents, renting an apartment in Southport. Later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the new baby's joy was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment, he could be joking and laughing. The next, he became unbalanced and aggressive. She tried to maintain a fragile peace at home, but didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. Loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations, with Mitchell kneeling, begging for forgiveness, and professing his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had returned to the family, but then the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening, and they advised her to return home and end her suffering. It was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control, forbidding his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricting her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Lindsay confided in her older sister about her suspicions of her husband Mitchell's infidelity. She shared an incident where a woman came to their home looking for him and was shocked to learn he was married. This led to an argument that escalated into physical violence. From then on, physical abuse became a regular part of their life, as Mitchell sought to control Lindsay and maintain his reputation. Mitchell began to isolate Lindsay from her neighbors, friends, and family, despite her efforts to secretly maintain contact with them. Lindsay stayed in the marriage because Mitchell provided a comfortable life, financially supporting her and their child. However, when she discovered she was pregnant again, she knew she didn't want more children and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When Mitchell found out, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. Lindsay packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family was relieved, and she proceeded with the pregnancy termination as planned. Over time, she began to miss Mitchell, who frequently called and begged her to come back. Mitchell eventually convinced Lindsay to give him another chance, and initially, everything seemed to go well. However, his severe anger outbursts continued, and he destroyed their apartment, leading to them being evicted. They had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. Their relationship continued to deteriorate, with Mitchell frequently leaving home for days or weeks at a time. Lindsay grew accustomed to his behavior, but eventually filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. She realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own and reached out to a local charity that assisted women in difficult situations. With their help, Lindsay found subsidized housing in another city and took measures to distance herself from Mitchell, including obtaining a restraining order. She began to rebuild her life, started a journal, and sought therapy. Despite her precautions, Mitchell discovered her phone number and began calling her, demanding to see their son. Lindsay, who had been feeling lonely, reunited with Mitchell despite her relatives' and friends' disapproval. They began living together again, which shocked those who cared about her. However, Mitchell remained unpopular with them, and they eventually stopped communicating with Lindsay, believing she had returned to an abusive relationship. This decision ultimately proved fatal. Initially, Mitchell was cooperative during the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance. However, as the case gained media attention, he shifted his focus and became a public figure, inviting journalists into his home. His numerous media appearances seemed insincere, with some viewers noticing a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents and detectives viewed Mitchell as the prime suspect, but the lack of direct evidence hindered their efforts. Searches were conducted at their home and throughout the area, but Mitchell continued to appear in the media, even declaring that Lindsay's family would one day apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mitchell sent a postcard to the lead investigator with a pack of hair dye, mocking the detective and displaying his arrogance. The investigation team responded by hinting that Mitchell was not who he claimed to be, tarnishing his reputation. In February 2000, it was discovered that Mitchell had been forging Lindsay's signature to receive social benefits, which indirectly implicated him in her disappearance. Despite the financial motive, Mitchell's popularity worked in his favor, and many supporters argued that he, as a single father, deserved financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring charges, but they eventually accused Mitchell of fraud. He was found guilty and sentenced to community service. However, Mitchell's popularity began to wane as the forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared suspicious. The number of angry comments increased, and Mitchell eventually snapped, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. The case might have remained unsolved had it not been for a chance discovery on June 1, 2000, when a park-goer noticed their dog acting strangely near a roller coaster. Human remains were uncovered, and forensic examination confirmed they belonged to Lindsay Key. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay was a victim of a brutal crime. The focus shifted to finding the perpetrator, and on June 7, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. After 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down and confessed to dismembering and murdering Lindsay on December 15, 1998. Mitchell told authorities that Lindsay had informed him of her decision to file for divorce earlier that day, which enraged him and led him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, using a gap under the door to conceal any odors. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, he enlisted the assistance of his brother Elliot, a butcher, who was initially hesitant but eventually persuaded. While the children played in the next room, Mitchell and Elliot dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, Mitchell showed no remorse or empathy, instead seeming proud of his actions and stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led authorities to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs, although her head and one hand were never recovered. Forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001, with Mitchell being found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist noted that Mitchell showed signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Wilson family when one of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. As of 2017, Mitchell Key has been eligible for parole, but his lawyers have been denied 3 times. The Wilson family, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released and have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. In an interview, Mr. Wilson mentioned hearing rumors that his former relative had attempted to end his life and added that he sincerely hopes the murderer will try again and succeed this time. He also commented on the prevalence of domestic Stockholm syndrome, where victims often adapt to their abusers throughout their lives, even when their families come to their aid. The case of Lamu. Lamu was born in 1990 in Nyawa, Tibet, Sichuan province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. The family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lama had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them, Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains to find rare herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lamu was well versed in these plants and had a deep love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok, where she posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she wasn't chasing fame. Instead, fame found her. Her audience adored Lamu for her smile, purity, and childlike spontaneity. Lamu never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings, and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. She never used makeup or filters, and her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches, and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lamu's subscriber count grew, and not only locals, but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offering warm words, expressing gratitude for her work, and asking for photos. Lamu was not proud of her fame, but was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. Lamu's personal life was marred by her abusive husband, Tong Li. For many years, she suffered at his hands, enduring beatings and humiliations, but tried not to show her deep unhappiness. Tong Li was born in 1990 in Sichuan province, China, into a simple and modest family. His parents adored him and spoiled him from an early age. At 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, earning little but keeping all the money to himself. This marked the beginning of his greedy, arrogant, and selfish nature. As a teenager, Tong began dealing in banned substances, stealing, and gambling, and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape poverty. At 15, he left home and joined a gang, engaging in illegal activities. Meanwhile, Tong's parents opened a successful spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. When the business took off, Tong returned home, offering to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives' hard work. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries and boasting to friends about his expensive items. He even claimed the store's success as his own, while his family worked hard daily. He maintained a separate, under-the-table business with local criminals. Lamu and Tong met when they were 17. Tong was enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity, and courted her earnestly, giving gifts and promising to change for her. Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming. They developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. Tong proposed to Lamu when he turned 19, and she eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry, believing they were too young to start a family. Lamu moved into her mother-in-law's house, but soon, Tong started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife changed drastically. Tong became crude, self-centered, and aggressive, taking a portion of the store's earnings and spending all the money on his own needs. Lamu and her husband Tong's relationship started to deteriorate. They frequently argued, with Lamu urging him to change his ways, give up drinking, and stop associating with criminals. However, Tong refused to listen, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. Their home became a battleground with conflicts erupting daily. Even when Lamu became pregnant, the situation didn't improve. One day, Tong's behavior shocked Lamu. She declared she would return to her parents' home, refusing to tolerate his treatment. Her mother-in-law, who had witnessed the incident, intervened, scolding her son and telling him he had no right to treat Lamu that way. The mother-in-law convinced Lamu to stay, promising that the abuse would stop. Lamu believed her and gave her husband another chance, a decision she would later regret. The abuse continued, with Tong regularly becoming physically violent, only to apologize afterward, begging Lamu not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had changed, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave, Tong threatened to take their son away and harm her and her parents. Fearing for her safety, Lamu stayed. Their child became Tong's tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu kept her nightmare hidden from her relatives, including her close older sister. After her mother's passing in 2012, Lamu found herself managing her parents' household and caring for her elderly father and grandmother. She continued to climb mountains to gather herbs, using the time to escape her husband's wrath and find solace in her thoughts. In 2017, Lamu gave birth to a second son, but her relations with Tong remained strained. Her mother-in-law stopped intervening on her behalf. Around the same time, Lamu created a social media account, posting videos about local beauty, flowers, and herbs. She gained a large following who admired her work and knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine. Her online presence became an outlet for her to express herself and momentarily escape her difficult reality. Lamu kept her domestic violence a secret, never complaining to her audience about her situation. However, when her grandmother passed away in 2019, she posted a video expressing her grief. Her followers supported her, unlike her husband, who became furious and struck her. Lamu finally decided to leave her abusive husband in January 2020, after enduring another violent incident. She took her sons and moved back to her parents' home, filing for divorce. At first, she felt calm and confident, despite trying to hide a large bruise under her eye. However, the court's decision to divide custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with her and the older with her ex-husband, was a devastating blow. During the divorce proceedings, her ex-husband suddenly changed his tactics, romantically pursuing her again and proposing they start over and not break up the family. For a couple of months, he pretended to be a repentant man, giving her flowers, creating celebrations, helping around the house, and even joining her on trips. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, they were married. But the fairy tale ended soon after Lamu returned to her husband's house. He reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, brutally attacking her nearly to death within 2 weeks of remarrying. He snatched her phone, hurled it against the wall, and battered her mercilessly. Lamu fled the house, barefoot, and went to the police, seeking protection. However, they only took her statement and advised her to resolve the family conflict on her own. Lamu decided to hide in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Her enraged husband was ready to end her life, but didn't know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house, so he visited and began yelling, demanding to know where Lamu was. When her sister claimed ignorance, he struck her repeatedly, fracturing her cheekbone, eye socket, and nose. After the Lamu's sister filed a police report, Lamu's ex-husband was finally held accountable, but not arrested. During the second divorce proceedings, the court left both sons with the father, as the wealthy Li family's influence proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains, recorded a video of herself singing and dancing, trying to relieve stress. However, her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. On the evening of September 14, 2020, Lamu started a live stream, chatting with her followers while dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. Suddenly, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. Lamu turned pale, frozen in fear, staring at the person entering. She jumped up, trying to escape, but the tripod with her smartphone fell, camera down. Viewers could only hear the heavy footsteps, the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls, and Lamu screaming for help. Her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell, followed by the click of a lighter and a piercing scream. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room grew louder. Followers were left stunned, refusing to accept that they had just witnessed a tragedy. It was not a prank, unfortunately. The worst had occurred. Tong had brutally exacted revenge on his ex-wife, Lamu, for leaving him. He rode a motorcycle to her house, bringing a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw Lamu in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door open. Lamu was caught off guard, barely understanding what was happening before she tried to flee. Tong prevented her escape, dousing her with fuel and wounding her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand the gravity of the situation as the flames erupted. Lamu's relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams were burning like torches, blocking the entrance. Miraculously, firefighters took about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and literally melted to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing, with a faint pulse detectable. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke. Despite her critical condition, Lamu desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma, and her condition was deemed critical. The city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering $1,000,000, a sum her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers, writing a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center, where she received the necessary care, and her condition was stabilized. At one point, it seemed she might recover. Tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, Lamu's heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. Tong was arrested the day after committing this heinous act. At the trial, his mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Tong guilty of deliberate cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death. Additionally, the court mandated his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tong attempted to appeal the verdict several times, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out and Tong Li was executed. 2 years after the tragic event that ended Lamu's life, her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in on the ground floor. Her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. The court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents, the Li family, who remained one of the wealthiest in the village and were believed to provide the children with better living conditions. The case of Liga Scromane. Liga Scromane was born in 1986 in Latvia, where she grew up in a close-knit family with an older brother and a younger sister. She later moved to Ireland, but remained close to her family. It was there that she met her future husband, Andrew Jordan. Despite struggling to connect with new people, the couple married 5 years later and shared big plans for their future. Liga worked at a hotel and lived modestly, but dreamed of opening a yoga retreat center in Portugal. Andrew supported her idea, and they saved money for 4 years to make it a reality. In early 2018, Liga was suffering from a severe skin condition that was affecting her physical and mental well-being. Her sister Ilse invited her on a trip to help her overcome this condition and regain her emotional balance. In February 2018, Liga and Ilse traveled to Thiruvananthapuram, the capital of Kerala, India, where Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Ayurveda, recognized by the World Health Organization since 1985 as one of the most effective alternative medicine systems, offered a promising solution for Liga's health issues. It's important to note that Ayurveda is not a cure-all, but rather a complementary approach to achieving healthy longevity. Liga, 33, and her sister Ilse traveled to Kerala seeking spiritual growth and relief from depression at an Ayurveda center. Their 6-week treatment plan included yoga, meditation, herbal remedies, and personalized nutrition and massage guidance. On March 14th, Liga skipped a yoga class, citing a headache. When Ilse returned to their room, Liga was gone. With the hotel staff's help, Ilse discovered that Liga had left the hotel at 11:30 a.m. in casual clothing, taking an auto rickshaw to Kovalam Beach for a walk. However, Liga was nowhere to be found on the beach, despite Ilse's thorough search until nightfall. Ilse reported her sister's disappearance to the police, but they showed little concern, believing Liga would either be found or return on her own the next day. Although they registered a case, the investigation was sluggish, effectively stalled from the start. Ilse took her sister Liga on a trip to India to share with her the country she loved so deeply. Tragically, the trip took a devastating turn. When the Indian police failed to take action for several days, Ilse decided to take matters into her own hands and began searching for Liga. She received support from friends and also informed her husband Andrew about Liga's disappearance, prompting him to fly to India immediately. After Liga went missing, her husband Andrew Jordan and sister Ilse launched a campaign to find her, reaching out to the local press and creating an online appeal. Ilse also tweeted to India's Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj, pleading for help and offering a 100,000 rupee reward to anyone with information about Liga's disappearance. Ilse and her friend Alexa, who had flown to India to help with the search, put up posters and distributed flyers in the Kovalam Beach area where Liga was last seen. Many locals joined the search efforts. However, it's important to note that Liga struggled with depression and found it difficult to interact with strangers. On the day she vanished, she took an auto rickshaw to the beach and was never seen again. At the time, she had about 3,000 rupees with her, but no passport, which meant she couldn't leave the country. Ashok Kumar, the head of the local police station, claimed that they had no leads in Liga's disappearance. Initially, the police believed she might have gone on a drinking binge or eloped and would eventually return on her own. However, persistent requests for help from Ilse and Andrew prompted the police to launch a search operation in the Kovalam Beach area where Liga was last seen. Although a woman's body was found washed ashore in Kanyakumari district, it was not identified as Liga's. Andrew suspected that Liga had been kidnapped by local gangs to be sold, and he attempted to infiltrate these gangs to gather more information. However, he was exposed and warned that if he continued to contact the gangs, he would have to leave the country. A month after Liga's disappearance, there were still no leads to her whereabouts. Ilse continued to search for her sister, visiting Kovalam Beach daily and observing people. She developed a theory that the only way to leave the beach unnoticed was by boat. Andrew returned to India on April 17, 2018, and joined Ilse in a new effort to find Liga, but her body remained unfound. The search for Liga was made more challenging due to her being a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry maintained close contact with Liga's family and collaborated with the Indian authorities throughout the search process. The Latvian embassy also reached out to the Indian Foreign Ministry for special assistance in finding Liga. Additionally, the Honorary Consul of Latvia in India, whose jurisdiction includes the region where Liga went missing, was involved in the search efforts. At the request of the Coral State government, the Indian Navy and Air Force participated in the search operation. The search effort was extensive, utilizing an AN-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, Liga remained missing, and the desired outcome was not achieved. By this point, everyone in the local community was aware of the missing tourist from Latvia and was supporting and sympathizing with Andrew and Ilse. On April 20th, 2018, Ela received the most awaited yet devastating call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew rushed to the designated spot where the police were waiting to take them to the scene by boat. Elsa's heart was racing as she felt the overwhelming horror of the situation. As they arrived, Elsa was met with a gruesome sight. She recognized her sister's clothes, including the shirt and leggings, on the body. However, the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained a mystery how Liga had ended up in this remote location, accessible only by going through Panatur from Samudra Beach. Two women came forward, confirming that they had seen Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But the question remained, why would a girl struggling with depression, already alone, take a boat to such a remote and inaccessible place in the forest? The body was taken to the Medical College Hospital for an autopsy, which was recorded on video. The police stated that they couldn't confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was complete. According to the city police commissioner, the body was severely mutilated, with the head found nearby. Although the police have tentatively identified the deceased as Liga, a missing tourist, they need DNA confirmation. Supporting the investigators' conclusion is the fact that Liga's relatives identified the victim by her hair and clothes. One possible theory, according to India's rescue services, is that Liga might have been poisoned by accidentally or intentionally eating the fruit of poisonous pong-pong trees found in the mangrove forest. Between 1989 and 1999, over 500 people died from poisoning by these fruits in Kerala alone. The idea initially seemed absurd, given the body was found hanging upside down, without a head. However, if Liga had been poisoned, her body would likely have been in a different position, and her head would have been in place. Indian authorities were spouting absurdities based on misinformation about Liga's complex psychological issues. The investigators also considered the possibility that Liga had willingly abandoned her life. Ilse was concerned that the police would try to cover up her sister's murder by claiming she had voluntarily ended her life, despite the presence of a rope at the scene, which suggested the hiker had hanged herself. Elsa demanded a credible explanation for the missing head, and Ilse sarcastically retorted, "Don't tell me it's just lost." Here are the forensic test results that Ilse and the public were waiting for. The evidence is overwhelming. The autopsy reveals that Liga Skoma was strangled to death by multiple people during a violent attack. There were blood pools in her brain, bruising on her neck, and external injuries on her body, likely sustained during the struggle. Although the body was decomposing, the characteristic injuries on her throat cartilage indicate that someone forcefully squeezed her throat. The trauma was severe and fatal. Blood clots in her brain confirm strangulation, and bruises were found on her neck and legs, with a total of 9 wounds recorded on her body. Based on the autopsy results, the police no longer consider Liga's death to be voluntary. Instead, they believe she was murdered after putting up a struggle. Ilse, Liga's sister, felt a sense of relief that the police were now taking the case seriously and hoped they would soon find the killers. As part of their investigation, the police started questioning local drug dealers and card players. They also spoke to local residents, 2 of whom reported seeing Liga walking alone to the area where her body was later discovered. However, the police had doubts about the credibility of these eyewitnesses. Liga's family has criticized the Indian police, accusing them of incompetence. They believe that if the police had launched a search for Liga immediately, the tragedy might have been prevented. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is thought to have been kidnapped from a nearby beach, taken by boat, and then strangled. A special team of investigators has been formed to find those responsible for the crime. So far, around 40 suspects have been questioned, and arrests are expected to be made in the coming days once the authorities have gathered sufficient evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men who were accused of murdering Liga Skron. According to the police, Liga Skron was lured by the two men, who then subjected her to physical abuse before dismembering her body. The two alleged assailants, now in custody, were local dealers of illegal substances. Both suspects, who were also pimps, fully confessed to the crime while under interrogation. However, the autopsy did not provide much evidence due to the advanced state of decomposition of Liga Skron's body. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court to review a felony murder case, suspecting that more people were involved in the woman's murder. He noted that both defendants had recanted their guilty pleas, suggesting that they may have confessed due to torture, a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband a review of the case, citing a lack of direct evidence. Andrew was outraged when the trial was postponed for 2 months. He had previously accused the authorities and police of incompetence and attempting to cover up the murder to avoid scaring off tourists. The suspect's lawyers requested and received a postponement, which they are legally entitled to do once without providing a reason. Andrew believed that the more the case was delayed, the more likely it was that the investigation was flawed. Despite his concerns, both suspects remained in custody. An investigation into Liga Skron's murder revealed that two men, Umesh, 32, and Udayakumar, 28, offered her drugs, specifically Ligaskani weed, and then strangled and decapitated her after she was incapacitated. The two suspects were arrested and found to have a history of committing similar crimes on multiple occasions. They worked for a food delivery company in Kerala's capital city and moonlighted as illegal tour guides. Umesh and Udayakumar have been charged with multiple crimes, including destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The location where Liga's body was discovered had previously been used by Umesh as a meeting spot for his male clients. He has a long history of criminal activity, with 13 cases filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have come forward to testify against him. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Liga with the two men in the area. Initially, they denied any involvement, but after Liga's body was found, they confessed to the murder, which was committed during an act of violence. The suspects were arrested, but initially claimed they only saw Liga in Kovalam. After repeated questioning, they eventually pleaded guilty. On December 6, 2022, the court sentenced the two men to life in prison and ordered them to pay 65,000 rupees each in compensation to Ilsa, Liga's sister. India has seen a surge in violent crimes against young girls, with a high number of sexual offenses committed against minors. In response, the government has introduced the death penalty to address the acute problem of crime in the country. The persistence of Liga's relatives, particularly her sister, and the involvement of the press and an influential MP were crucial in ensuring the case was thoroughly investigated. Initially, the local police were not taking the case seriously, suggesting that Liga may have voluntarily disappeared. This is not an isolated incident in this area, where similar cases have occurred before. The case of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. Nathan and Crystal Maddox grew up on neighboring streets, fell in love, and later got married when Crystal became pregnant. Despite initial disapproval from Crystal's parents, they eventually accepted the relationship and even let the young couple get married. After their wedding, Nathan and Crystal started a family, having a daughter named Madison. However, their life was far from perfect. Nathan had to work hard to support his family, often traveling to Montana for work. Despite the distance, he remained devoted to his family, regularly sending money and visiting whenever possible. But one day, Nathan returned home from Montana to find his house empty and a note from Crystal saying she was leaving him. She claimed she didn't know where he was or when he would return, which was a lie, as Nathan had been regularly updating her on his whereabouts. The worst part was that she took their daughter Madison with her and even went to the police station, falsely accusing Nathan of neglecting his child in order to gain full custody. Nathan tried to visit his daughter Madison, but her mother's family, the Westfalls, kept pushing him away, relieved to be rid of him. Years passed, and Nathan returned to his hometown to be close to Madison. He didn't give up trying to see her, but he knew he needed a lawyer to get official custody and legal visitation rights. During this time, Nathan met Crystal, an old friend from childhood. They had gone to school together, but their paths diverged when Crystal moved to the city to attend university. However, she got married and started a family instead of pursuing a career. After her divorce, Crystal returned to her hometown with her 4 children. Nathan was immediately drawn to Crystal's energy and optimism. They got married in 2013, and Nathan worked at a warehouse while Crystal started a clothing business and opened a children's boutique. The family was doing well, and they could finally afford a good lawyer to help Nathan get custody of Madison. Madison was thrilled with her father's new family, including Crystal and her siblings. This made Kristen's parents, Lita and Paula Westfall, very resentful and afraid of losing their granddaughter. In 2012, Kristen had applied for full custody of Madison, and the battle dragged on for 2 years. However, Crystal's presence in Nathan's life changed everything. With a stable family and a good job, Nathan was granted visitation rights, and he was ecstatic. In October 2013, the judge allowed supervised visits with Madison. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal attended a Sunday service at Mount Carmel Church, planning to take Madison for a walk afterwards. But as they left the church, 3 loud shots were heard. Nathan and Crystal were shot and killed, shocking the small town. The police investigation revealed that Nathan and Crystal were shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle, and Nathan was also shot in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun, indicating that there were 2 shooters. The investigation continued, with interviews of witnesses, acquaintances, and relatives, including Kristen's family. The Westfalls' behavior shocked investigators. Instead of grieving Nathan's death, they seemed to be hiding their joy. Paul Westfall even faked a seizure, claiming he was too shocked to believe the news. It was clear they were involved in the murder, but the motive remained unknown. Kristen was the first to be interviewed, and her demeanor was eerily calm, and that despite her long history with Nathan and their shared child. She provided strange details about him, only highlighting the negative aspects of their relationship. Kristen claimed she knew who killed him, mentioning that Nathan had been involved with dangerous motorcycle gangs in Montana. One gang member had even threatened to kill him at his mother's house. Although this story checked out, it turned out to be an empty threat due to a broken motorcycle. As an alibi, Kristen said she was at the grocery store with her father, Paul, on the day of the crime. Surveillance footage confirmed their presence at 10:57 a.m. Paul told the same story, but as a hunter with access to firearms, his hands were tested for gunpowder residue, which came back negative. However, his reaction to Nathan's death seemed suspicious, leaving a sliver of doubt about his sincerity. Further investigation revealed that Nathan was involved in a bitter custody battle with Kristen over their daughter. He was close to gaining custody, which the Westfall family strongly opposed. This desperate battle might have been a motive for the murder, but the police had no concrete evidence to arrest anyone. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 of them were the shooters. Investigators were yet to figure out who pulled the trigger or if they had hired a killer. Focusing on the key player in the controversy, Madison Maddox, the police decided to act. They removed her from the home, citing safety concerns, and searched the house. The search yielded disturbing results. A gun was easily accessible, and illegal drugs were scattered around the house. In 2013, Kristen was arrested and charged with possessing a controlled substance. Despite this, she continued to live with her parents and daughter, defying court orders. In 2014, Child Protective Services discovered a used syringe with illegal substances and a gun on Kristen's nightstand, leading to Madison being taken into temporary custody. The authorities wanted to place Madison in foster care, due to the presence of illegal substances and a gun in the Westfall home. However, there was no direct evidence linking the Westfalls to the Maddox murder, and cross-examinations did not produce the desired results. To pressure the Westfalls, the police focused on 18-year-old Cameron, the most vulnerable family member. They threatened him with life imprisonment for his family and the death penalty for the direct killers if he didn't cooperate. Fearing for his family, Cameron agreed to work with the investigation and revealed the details of the crime. The murder of the young couple, Maddox, was carefully planned by the Westfall family to eliminate Nathan from his role as father. This was due to a bitter custody dispute between Nathan and his ex-wife, Kristen, who had the support of her family. The Westfalls were determined to keep Madison from her father, and when the judge allowed Nathan multiple visitations, it became clear he could win the trial. Kristen and her family plotted a scheme to remove Nathan from Madison's life. They tried to find someone to kill him, but when that failed, Kristen and her father decided to do it themselves. On January 18th, the family attended church, and Kristen and Paul created an alibi by posing as customers at a distant store to get on CCTV cameras. Meanwhile, Lita Westfall, Kristen's mother, attended the church service with Madison and informed Paul of Nathan and Crystal's departure. She called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron played a role in concealing the evidence, discarding the gun used in the murder near a remote church and at a lake. He later cooperated with authorities, revealing that Kristen came up with the idea and the family went along with it. The police arrested Kristen, her brother Cameron, and her parents, Paul and Lita Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Kristen and Paul were the ones who pulled the trigger, while Cameron and Lita acted as willing accomplices. Although Lita was at the church during the incident, phone records showed she informed her daughter and husband of the couple's whereabouts. The trial was lengthy, with each member of the Westfall family tried separately. Paul Westfall was initially found mentally unfit, but was later deemed competent and faced the death penalty along with Lita. To avoid the death penalty, they agreed to a plea bargain with the DA's office. Paul Westfall took a plea bargain with the prosecution, pleading guilty to the charges and receiving a life sentence without parole. Lita Westfall, his wife, also took a plea bargain, pleading guilty to organized criminal activity. She will be eligible for parole in 2046 and is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Kristen Westfall, the daughter of Paul and Lita, pleaded not guilty to all charges against her, claiming her family was crazy and she was the only sane one. However, when her family members testified against her in court, she was unable to respond. The motive behind the murder of Nathan and Crystal Maddox was revealed to be custody of their 5-year-old daughter, Madison. Kristen did not want Nathan to have unrestricted access to Madison and wanted to control her father's communication with the child. The trial took over a week, and with overwhelming evidence against her, the jury found her guilty of capital murder in just 8 hours. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Cameron Westfall, the youngest member of the family, was charged with 2 counts of tampering with evidence. He pleaded guilty and received a deferred sentence, contingent upon him testifying against his family. He faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Although he claimed to have had no involvement in the actual shooting, phone records showed that his mother had texted her husband and daughter during the crime. Cameron is currently incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Texas and is expected to be released in 2025. The case was highly publicized and shook the community of Colmsnale, Texas, to its core. The Westfall family's brutal crime was committed outside Mount Carmel Baptist Church, where Nathan and Crystal Maddox were shot and killed in 2014. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison, and his mother received a life sentence the following year. Lloyd Paul was also sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to first-degree murder, which meant he could not appeal his sentence. Kristen Westphal, the mastermind behind the crime, received a life sentence without parole. The legal battle for custody of Madison Maddox, Kristen's daughter, continued even after the Westphal family was sentenced. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. It's worth noting that many people die in custody battles every year, and instead of making children happier, these battles often leave them with psychological problems. The Westphal family, who were devout churchgoers, were willing to kill to achieve their goals, hiding behind their concern for Madison. Nathan, Madison's father, was not a bad person and loved his daughter. However, his ex-wife Kristen was filled with hatred towards him, particularly because he had started a new family and found happiness with his new partner, Crystal. Kristen was able to manipulate her family against Nathan, leading to the tragic events that unfolded. The custody dispute started before Nathan and Crystal's relationship, and in the end, there is only one loser, Madison. Hopefully, when she grows up, she will not remember the selfishness of the adults who used her for their own gain, claiming to act out of love. If they truly loved her, they would have worked to build a normal relationship for her sake, rather than pursuing their own interests. The case of Michelle Leng. Michelle was an intelligent and motivated individual who enrolled in the University of Technology in Sydney, where she studied economics and hospitality management. She was an adventurous person who loved to travel, take risks, and explore new places. Her social media profiles revealed a vibrant personality who enjoyed posting photos and videos of her outings with friends. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Michelle posted videos and photos from her trips to various locations in New South Wales. On June 13, 2013, she visited Snapper Point, where she took a prophetic photo of herself on the edge of a cliff. Michelle was confident, outgoing, and had a busy life, balancing her studies with a part-time job and a social life. Michelle Leng went to a mall on April 2, 2016, and boarded a train after lunch. She got off at a station around 4:30 p.m. and was never seen again. 2 days later, her uncle went to the train station to meet his wife, who had returned from a business trip. And that's when they realized Michelle was missing. Her family became worried when they couldn't contact her, as she was always in daily contact with friends and family members living in China and Australia. They inspected her room, which was in complete order, and looked through her laptop, concluding that she hadn't returned from her day out. On April 24, 2016, a body was found by tourists at Snapper Point, and a compiled sketch of the victim confirmed it was Michelle. The police took 3 days to officially identify her and launch an investigation. The first theory was that Michelle had been attacked by an unknown person she had planned to meet that day. However, CCTV cameras showed Michelle was alone on the day of her disappearance, and her friends said she had no plans to meet anyone. An investigation into her social networks and correspondence found no evidence of a secret meeting. The autopsy revealed Michelle's body had multiple injuries, including stab wounds, indicating she had tried to fight off her attacker. The police believe she was brutally assaulted before her death, but it's unclear who could have attacked her in such a lonely area. Forensic evidence showed Michelle's body had been in the water for less than 48 hours, meaning it was likely dumped recently. The police studied CCTV and traffic cameras to determine Michelle's last movements and continued to interview her family members, friends, and co-workers for additional information. Police Inspector Gary Jubilant said Michelle was a responsible person who always stayed in touch with her family, which made her disappearance unusual. The police were suspicious of Derek Barrett, Michelle's uncle, who had been unemployed and often stayed up late, but they found no evidence linking him to the crime. The investigators began questioning Derek about his relationship with Michelle and asked him to recall the last time he had seen her. Under pressure, Derek refused to answer and demanded a lawyer. This suspicious behavior raised doubts, leading to his arrest as a suspect. Before the interrogation, Investigators had checked Derek's cell phone signal and found that he was in the same area where Michelle's body was later discovered on April 24th. Surveillance footage from a parking lot also showed a car matching the description of Derek's vehicle in the early morning hours of April 24th. Despite Derek's denials, the footage proved his presence in the parking lot. The police charged Derek, 27, with the murder of 25-year-old Michelle Lang, whose naked body with multiple stab wounds was found in a hole on the central Enniswoth coast. Michelle's family was left in shock, especially her mother, who was devastated by the news. Police released CCTV footage showing Michelle's last shopping trip in Sydney's Central Business District on April 21st. The footage showed her shopping at a Pitt Street mall and boarding a train at St. James Station. Police believe Michelle returned to her family home in the afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin. She was presumed to have been murdered at home. The autopsy revealed that Michelle had tried to fight off her attacker and was stabbed multiple times in defense. CCTV footage also captured a vehicle entering Lake Moan-Morrick National Park at around 7 a.m. on April 24th, with Michelle's body believed to be inside. Despite Derek being detained and charged, the investigation continued, and further details of Michelle's final minutes surfaced. Additional charges were laid, including 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a filming device, and murder. The investigation revealed that Derek had an unhealthy sexual interest in his wife's young niece. Analysis of Derek's cell phone found previously deleted data, including files that left no doubt about his involvement in Michelle's death and his unhealthy interest in her. The phone contained images taken just before Michelle's death, showing her returning home on April 21st around 5 p.m. and sending her last text message around midnight. Derek had set up a hidden camera in the shared bathroom, which he regularly reviewed. The phone also contained images of Michelle taken before her death. It appeared that Derek had entered Michelle's room around midnight, attempting to take photos and videos of her while she was asleep. However, Michelle woke up, and Derek attacked her, tying her up and putting duct tape over her mouth. He kept her tied to the bed for 2 days, periodically abusing her and taking photos. Michelle was still alive on April 23rd when Derek took a picture of her around 8 a.m. Later that day, Derek's stepson came home twice but didn't hear Michelle's quiet moans because Derek was taking a shower at the time. Surveillance cameras showed that Derek left the apartment 4 times to take out the trash, presumably after Michelle had already died. During this time, Derek cleaned the house thoroughly, washing away any traces of blood and hiding evidence of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. The next day, April 24th, at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point, stopping at a gas station to buy drinks and fill up his car with gas, where he was caught on CCTV cameras. When he arrived at Snapper Point, he got rid of Michelle's body and took some pictures around 9 a.m. Afterwards, he visited his parents, who didn't notice anything unusual about his behavior, and then returned home, waiting for his wife to return. Derek reported that he hadn't seen Michelle and that she hadn't come home, even accompanying his wife to the police station to file a missing persons report. On June 29, 2016, the first court hearing was held, and Derek's lawyer, Bill Whitby, told the court that Derek was pleading not guilty and was as shocked and upset by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. However, it was revealed that Derek had taken illegal drugs the day before killing Michelle, and he claimed to have only vague memories of the 2-hour trip to Snapper Point, where he threw Michelle's body off the cliff. Forensic psychologist Dr. Richard first disputed Derek's claims of memory loss, testifying that Derek was mentally fit to be punished to the full extent of his sentence. Dr. First testified that the drugs Derek was taking did not cause memory loss, and that all of his actions, from the murder to the disposal of the body, were clear and purposeful. The doctor also stated that Derek's IQ, concentration, and memory were within normal limits, and that the number of stab wounds indicated sadistic tendencies rather than memory lapses. The psychologist rejected Derek's claim that he did not feel sexually attracted to the victim and believed that Derek faked amnesia to avoid taking responsibility for the crime. A doctor, Richard, disputed Derek Barrett's claim, stating it was self-defeating because it was clear that the suspect had gained weight during the time period in question. Judge Wilson, a seasoned criminal defense attorney with 30 years of experience, expressed her skepticism about Derek Barrett's behavior in the courtroom, describing it as insincere and akin to that of a psychopath. She believed that Barrett's crime was not the result of a drunken night or poor life choices, but rather a deliberate act. During the retrial hearing, Barrett pleaded guilty to murdering and kidnapping Michelle Lang, as well as sneaking into her room while she slept and making videos. He also admitted taking 19 explicit photos of her shortly before her death. Barrett claimed he couldn't remember the 48-hour period during which he committed the crime because he was under the influence of illegal substances. Judge Wilson, however, did not believe Barrett's claim of memory loss, nor did she believe he was genuinely sorry for his actions. The Lang family consoled each other while Barrett wiped away tears and said that he deserved to live and that this should never have happened. Judge Wilson sentenced Barrett to 34 years and 6 months in prison with a maximum term of 46 years. He will be eligible for parole in 2050. Barrett showed no emotion when sentenced. Michelle's mother, Mrs. Jiang, thanked the Australian and Chinese communities for their support during her time of grief. She also thanked the NSW police, including Detective Inspector Gary Jubilant, for investigating her daughter's death. A fund was set up to pay for Miss Lang's funeral and to support her mother when she returns to China. Tragically, Michelle Lang's story did not end there. 4 years after the crime, inexplicable events occurred in one family where a woman often visited her elderly mother. In a surprising discovery, a woman found an unknown USB device in her elderly mother's hands during a visit. When the daughter plugged the USB drive into her computer, she was shocked to find graphic videos and photos of obscene content. The police were contacted, and an investigation revealed that the USB drive contained 9 video files lasting over an hour and 13 files with photos of Michelle Lang being abused shortly before her murder on April 23, 2016. The woman who found the USB drive lived about 4 miles from Derek Barrett's former home and had no discernible connection to him. It remains a mystery where the USB drive came from and how it ended up in the woman's family home. Police were able to match the photos on the USB drive to those that Derek Barrett had deleted from his phone before his arrest in an attempt to hide his crimes. In 2020, Barrett was charged with multiple sex offenses after the disturbing content was found on the USB drive in November 2019. Prosecutors admitted they were stumped by the discovery of the device, which led to new charges. The elderly woman with dementia was confined to her home, and it is unclear how the USB drive ended up in her possession. Thanks to the new evidence, Derek Barrett's sentence was extended without parole. The horrific discovery of the USB drive in the hands of an elderly woman in a leafy Sydney suburb resulted in the convicted criminal receiving additional years of punishment. The story of Michelle Lang stands as a heartbreaking reminder to appreciate the preciousness of life, since the future is uncertain and can change in an instant. After her passing, tributes poured in from friends and acquaintances on Chinese and Australian social media, emphasizing the devastating and lasting effects of bullying, fear, and criminal behavior.